Evening, everybody. This is DrHack, and we are ready, guys, to do the Caro-Kann and do it right. Now, two things you should know before we do this. One is that I have made two videos on this topic before this one, and I am going to lean on that strategy in those two videos heavily for part of this video. So if you haven't seen them, you probably will feel like I'm going too fast. So you might want to stop this one and go back to those first two, maybe. Otherwise, try to keep up, okay? No problem. The other thing is that I searched the internet, interwebs far and wide, and the stuff that I found was mind-boggling. It was extremely, extremely mildly impressive. And I think that all the information out there on this opening, not a one of those videos or articles or anything explains the why behind the moves. This might be a world's first what we're going to do today. I don't know. Man, if you guys know any other resources, post them in the comments for everybody else because we need this stuff. All right, so we're going to over-explain everything too because I don't think it exists. And we're starting with not the weird second moves this time. Because when you play the weird second moves in this one, kind of the fundamental problem with them is very apparent when you look at the main ideas. So we're going to go with the main ideas first, and then we're going to filter back down into those weird second moves for the next video or the one after that or so. Don't worry, we'll catch it. We'll get it all. Okay. The prior two videos to this one were what happens if this pawn trades with that pawn. Today we're going to look at what happens if you push past. And the one thing I want you to remember is that, as the black pieces, it is our job to equalize the game, to equalize the attack, because we start from behind. We have to catch up before we can ever start to push forward and try to win. So the first thing we need to do in order to kind of equalize an attack is to understand the attack. So let's actually look at it, without the pieces on the board, and let's try to understand how white is going to try to beat us. Okay, and I'm actually going to go ahead and lock these together, and then I'm going to flip the board and we're going to look at it from white's point of view. And if you guys are kind of noticing this attack for white, automatically, just by looking at it, we can see that it's very similar to the one when they took the pawn. The bishop can reach this square, and it can reach h7. The queen can do the same thing it did in the other version of this opening, right? The knight's the same. Everything could happen the same way that we're used to seeing when the pawns traded. Right? So what's different? Well, if we were to move the kings over here, what if white's attack were to happen on this square instead of on h7? Because I think that's a very real possibility as well, right? Because the rook's going to end up here, and this pawn could start to walk up the board, and if it makes it through f5 and then to f6, that pawn's going to be attacking g7, and there's going to be a really big attack that comes here based on the bishop, the pawn, and then the queen. And maybe a knight too if it can get up there, right? And so possibly these two things now are going to be under attack. Well, let's deal with those one at a time. Okay, first of all, this one. And I think this is the one you guys are most ready for, right? Because we know that the number one attackers are the queen and the bishop. And if we could trade either one of them, that would slow down their attack big time. So now we know the bishop that starts back here, it really needs to be out there. I can't tell you how much you really want it to be out there. I'm so convinced of that, by the way, that if your bishop somehow didn't make it outside the pawn chain in a game, I don't think you should castle. I think you should keep your king right in the center. And that leads us to a discussion about king safety that we've never had before. Because kings can be safe, when you castle. That's why coaches tell you castle early and castle often. It was actually based on a study, by the way, back when there was a guy reporter who was looking at simul games. And he saw that whenever the people would castle, they'd have a chance, and all the people who didn't castle in the game got beaten. And so he started thinking to himself, castling must be a thing. And then he wrote it in his news article, and then it got big. Castle early, castle often. The more you know, right? But anyway, a king can be very safe when when he's not castled if we don't have any pieces that can get to him. For example, if the king were sitting on d7, this is all hypothetical. I don't really want you to move your king to d7 if you don't have to. Okay? But if your king was sitting on d7, the only piece that could get to him from that position would be a knight sitting exactly here, because the bishops can't get through because the pawns are in the way, and the rooks can't get through because there are pawns in the way, right? So the king would be extremely safe except to a knight's check, and if this pawn moved forward, that knight's check would no longer be possible. Very, very simple way to defend the king if he's sitting here, because all these pawns are just doing a great job surrounding him. Well, what if he was sitting here? That makes it a lot more difficult, doesn't it? Because now we see the open lines pointed at the king. We see that a bishop or a queen could give him checks from these squares. Well, and here's the big idea. What if there was no dark square bishop or queen on the board? All of a sudden, that square would be the safest square in the entire world for the king, because nothing can get to him there if there's no bishop or queen. So your king actually gets safer on certain parts of the board depending on what material is left on the board. Amazing, huh? And that's the idea here. Now that's how we defend this one. We get the bishop outside. We try to neutralize the attackers. What in the world do we do about that one, right? Now let's think back and let's think about how many pieces there were attacking this place. We had a bishop, right? We had a queen, and we had a pawn. 3 pieces really. If he's lucky and he got a knight this way on this track, maybe a 4th piece. That means you've got to defend that thing with 3 of your own pieces, right? How can you even imagine a situation or setup where 3 of your pieces are defending this square? There is only one way. It has to be across the 7th row. It has to be rooks and queens across the 7th row, guys, to defend this. There can be a bishop, of course, defending it. But after that, and that means that this piece will eventually have to move forward in order for this pawn to get defended. And now if you move this piece 2 squares forward, now it blocks the diagonal and it opens the defense of g7. So this f-pawn move is probably the most important weapon you have to defend your king. And that's incredible when you start to realize that. Now the problem that we have with this guy is that as soon as you move him, because you know that anybody who knows about en passant is going to play en passant, right? They just will. And if they forget about it, then this pawn is just blocking everything, and it's great, right? Now what happens, let me just get rid of that for a second here. Bear with me. What happens to this pawn once that pawn is missing? He becomes one of those infamous backwards dudes. Walks backwards, talks backwards. No, that's not what it is. He just doesn't have any pawns defending him anymore, and he has a really hard time moving forward because there's no pawns to defend that square either. And so he becomes a little bit of a target. So in order to get good defense, we had to give up something. We had to give up pawn structure. Let's take a look at this with all the pieces back on the board. Right. So this is black's turn. Here's your first exam. Can you think of a good move for black? Well, all right then, right? We know that we'd like to close the pawns, but we know we would really like not to have our bishop back here when we do, because we know that this bishop is going to be one of his big attackers on our h7 pawn, and we'd like to get rid of it. So the bishop goes outside the pawns. And that is the most standard way to take this on, and that's the reason why. Now we know. We don't have to think about it anymore, we just know. And we're going to revisit this for all the weird stuff that can happen. Don't worry, for those of you who are in the know. There is some weird stuff here. We're going to play a couple more moves for white, because I want to know, what will you do if he asks you this question? Do you want to trade bishops? Right? Well, that's kind of why we did that, guys. If we're not taking the bishop now, when are we taking it? You know, we want that thing off the board. Let's go. And now I actually want to stop myself, but then I actually don't, because I want to give you some really cool chess theory here. I don't want you to memorize stuff, but I do want you to see this, okay? Because we're about to make our opponent's head explode. legitimately explode. Like, I kid you not. Because, you know, here he could block with any piece. This isn't the chess theory, guys. Don't get excited. But the next move, we ask him the question, would you like to trade queens? And their head goes, right? Because how do we make that decision? It's a big choice for us as amateurs. And the cool thing about this is either choice that he makes is wrong. This is like that Princess Bride moment where he puts the poison in both cups, you know? And he's like, now choose. Well, we are immune to iocane powder, guys. This is not going to hurt us. Because if he decides to take the queen, his two attacks that we just talked about, they don't work very well anymore without a queen. I don't even think they exist. And then if we go back and he moves the queen away, now he can't castle. And that's going to take him a little while to figure out how to castle without trading queens. Okay, and his knight's probably going to end up there, most likely. And if he trades queen, you know, if he castles to the queen side, we've already got a big attack over there with the queen already being there, and our normal attack happens over there anyways, that we haven't discovered what that is yet. Okay, so I think that's one of the coolest bits of theory in the whole game, of the whole Caro-Kann. Not many people know about that one. You just either keep that to yourself or just go tell all your friends, but then they're going to know your secret. Do what you want. You do you. Okay, so let's go back. And let's pretend like white kind of knows what he's doing for a minute here. Because the real trick, the real secret to understanding how to play this closed game is knowing that this knight has to have a job. And it's very, very similar to what we had to do in the Ruy Lopez, where this knight had to do some really weird stuff in order to make this game work. Okay, now in the Ruy Lopez, it was the other knight. It was the queen's knight that was doing the weird stuff. But in this case, it's the kingside knight. And if we know that that knight would rather be over here, then the game will all of a sudden make sense again. Okay, and that means that this knight needs to be here. And what does that mean for this pawn? It can't stay there, guys. It has to go. And that allows us, just that little logic that this knight needs to be over here, that allows us to play the next several moves of this opening. Because now we know that because this pawn is going to move and trade, this is going to be the open file where your rooks get over to his game. And so now your rooks are going to start coming to the C file. Your knights are going to start moving in this kind of pattern. And you're going to start to realize that this game is very playable. And it's closed and it's weird, but we got this. I sure hope this helps somebody. We're going to dive deeper into this next time because we need to know some of the weird stuff that I just skipped. You guys have a good one. Take care now. Bye.